All right, so I want you to picture something for me, just for a second. It's the late 1950s. You're, let's say, a successful American. You've got the house in the suburbs, maybe a car with some,
Yeah.
serious tail fins in the driveway. And you have just spent a small fortune on the absolute centerpiece of your living room, a stereo console.
The hearth of the mid-century home.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
this massive piece of furniture, wood paneling. It's got real weight to it, and it dominates the space.
Oh, yeah.
But here's the friction point. You turn it on, you put on a standard record, I don't know, some Bing Crosby, maybe a symphony, and it just sounds fine.
Right. And fine isn't what you paid for.
Not at all. It doesn't sound like money. It doesn't sound like the future you were promised when the salesman took your cash.
You're describing a really specific historical frustration there. It's this gap between what the hardware could do and what the records was actually providing.
The technology for stereo sound with distinct left and right channels was in the home, but the content wasn't using it.
Not yet.
And that is exactly where our subject for today's deep dive comes in. We are talking about Enoch Light and his legendary label, Command Records.
This is the guy who looked at that expensive stereo console and said, okay, I'm going to make something that actually justifies this purchase.
He's often called the architect of sound, which, sounds like a lofty marketing title.
It does.
Yeah.
But based on our source for this, a column from MMR, that's Monumental Movement Records, it's actually pretty literal. He didn't just record music, he constructed it for the physical space of your living room.
So today we're going to explore how Light basically invented the demonstration disc.
And how he used 35mm movie film, of all things, to get this unbelievable audio fidelity.
Plus, how he turned the record cover into a piece of modern art that you just had to own.
And we absolutely have to talk about the human element in all this. For all the talk of machines and circuits, there's a guitarist, a guy named Tony Mottola, who became the secret weapon in this whole audio arms race.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1959. Enoch Light founds Command Records.
Right. And up until then, the whole philosophy of recording was basically documentary. You put a mic in a room with a band, and you try to capture what happened in that room.
As faithfully as possible.
Exactly. It was about fidelity to the performance. If the drummer was in the back, he sounded like he was in the back. It was passive.
But Enoch Light looked at that and just rejected it.
Completely. He wasn't interested in capturing a live event. He wanted to create a sound stage.
That's a term we hear all the time now in audiophile circles, but he meant it differently, didn't he?
He did. For Light, the stereo field, so the space between your left speaker and your right speaker, that was a canvas. He realized that with two-channel stereo, he could place instruments in locations that were physically impossible in a real room.
And this is where we get that famous, or maybe infamous, ping-pong effect.
It is. And look, it's easy now to call it a gimmick or cheesy, but you have to understand its purpose at the time. If you wanted to show your neighbor that your expensive new stereo was actually working, you needed that extreme separation. You needed the bongos hard left and the trumpets hard right.
It's audio validation.
Precisely. You paid for two speakers. You want to hear two distinct things happening. The MMR analysis points out that Light used these really aggressive multi-microphone techniques.
He isolated everything.
The goal was so you could sit in your Eames chair, close your eyes, and literally point to where the percussionist was supposed to be.
Even if, in the studio, that musician was nowhere near there, it was a fabricated reality, a hyper-reality. Audio CGI before CGI was even a thing.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for the tech geeks listening.
Right, yeah.
To get that level of clarity, he couldn't just rely on microphone placement. He ran into a problem with the recording medium itself. And this is the part I found most surprising. The shift to 35mm film.
This is the real deep dive technical nugget right here. In the late 50s, the industry standard was magnetic tape. Tape is great, but it has physical limits. It can stretch, it can slip.
And it has what's called wow and flutter, these tiny inconsistencies in speed that distort the pitch.
And hiss. Can't forget the tape hiss.
Oh, tape hiss is the enemy of the audiophile. It's that background static that tells you you're listening to a recording.
Yeah.
Enoch Light wanted a black background. Absolute silence.
So that when a sound appeared, it just popped out of nowhere.
And he realized that Hollywood, the film industry, was using a superior medium for their soundtracks.
35mm magnetic film.
Yes. The same stock they used to shoot movies, but coded for magnetic recording. And just think about the physical difference between a thin strip of audio tape and a thick strip of movie film.
The film is way wider, right?
More than twice as wide, so you have more surface area for the magnetic particles, which means higher fidelity, wider dynamic range. You can get louder without distortion.
But the real key, according to the source material, was the sprocket holes.
Exactly. Standard tape relies on friction to move across the heads. It can slip, but 35mm film has sprocket holes that lock into gears. It runs at a precise, locked speed. No slipping, no flutter.
Mechanically perfect.
So you have Enoch Light literally hauling these massive film projector-type machines into Carnegie Hall to record an orchestra. The image is just, it's wild.
Nobody else was crazy enough to do it.
Or rich enough. It was incredibly expensive. But the result was a sound that had practically zero background noise and a transient response.
Okay, what's transient response?
It's the speed at which a sound starts and stops. And that's crucial because of the music he was recording. He was obsessed with percussion.
Right. Percussion has a sharp attack, a snare hit, a bongo slap.
A xylophone ping. These are sounds with very fast transients. If your recording medium smears that split-second attack, you lose the realism. The 35mm film captured that snap perfectly. It felt like the drummer was inside your head.
Which brings us to the content. We've got the tech, we've got the film, but what are we actually listening to? The genre gets called space age pop or
Bachelor pad music.
or hi-fi lounge. It's this strange mix of jazz standards and pop covers, but they're all rearranged to prioritize the equipment. The song feels secondary to the sound.
The arrangement served the engineering. That's the crucial takeaway. Light would tell his arrangers to write parts specifically to jump between speakers. He wasn't asking, what's the emotional arc of this song?
He was asking, how can we make the listener's head turn from left to right?
Exactly.
That sounds a little cynical, doesn't it? Like it's just a tech demo, not art. You know, like when you buy a new TV and it's playing that loop of colorful flowers.
And that was the main criticism at the time. Critics called it soulless, mechanical, a gimmick. But the public completely disagreed. And I think a huge part of that success was the packaging. Command didn't just sell you a disc, they sold you an object.
The MMR column spends a lot of time on this, the visual aesthetic. This wasn't a picture of a smiling singer on the cover.
No. Enoch Light hired Joseph Albers.
Which is a massive flex. Albers was a serious figure in the Bauhaus movement, abstract art. Why put his homage to the square on a pop record?
Because Albers was all about the interaction of color and form. Simple geometric shapes, rigorous structure. It was a perfect metaphor for what Light was doing with the music.
Mm-hmm.
The music was structural, geometric, precise.
And putting that kind of art on a record cover in 1959, it sent a very specific signal to the consumer.
It said, this is sophisticated, this is modern.
Mm-hmm.
It set Command apart from all the teen pop. If you had a modern house with modern furniture, you needed the modern record to display on the shelf.
A lifestyle accessory.
And the physical packaging reinforced that. They used the Gatefold jacket.
Which was mostly for like classical box sets before this.
Right. A Gatefold opens like a book. It's heavy cardboard. It feels substantial.
And when you opened it up, you didn't just get a track list, you got a manual.
A technical manual. The liner notes would detail the microphone placement, the frequency response. They literally told you what to listen for. Listen to the decay of the cymbal in the left channel. It turned active listening into a game.
There's a quote from their marketing that really stood out to me. The first moment you listen will be a surprise.
It's aggressive, isn't it?
It is. It's almost a dare. Is your stereo system good enough for this record?
It creates this sense of exclusivity. You're not just a music fan, you are a discerning audiophile. You're in the club. It validated the thousands of dollars you spend on that console.
So did it work? Did this strategy actually sell records? Because usually tech demo discs are, well, they're boring.
That's the anomaly of Command records. They were massive hits. We have to talk about the Percussion series. In 1959, they released Persuasive Percussion.
Even the title is a sales pitch. Persuasive.
Implying the sound itself will convince you. That album was a blockbuster. It stayed on the Billboard charts for over 2 years.
2 years? For an album of percussion music? That's insane.
It was #1 for 13 weeks, and was followed by Provocative Percussion, and then the big one in 1961, Stereo 35mm.
The one recorded on the film stock.
Recorded at Carnegie Hall, it shot to #1. Think about that. An instrumental album, marketed on his recording method, literally named after the film stock, was outselling Elvis.
It suggests the sound itself was the star.
Exactly. But, and this is a big, but it wasn't just the sound. If the music had been unlistenable, no amount of fidelity would have kept it at #1. There was real musicality there, and a lot of that came from one person.
We need to talk about Tony Mottola.
The human heartbeat of Command records.
The source material really highlights him as more than just a session guy. He was Enoch Light's right-hand man. Who was he?
Tony Mottola was a heavy hitter in the New York scene. One of those guys who could play anything, jazz, classical, pop. He'd worked with Sinatra, Perry Como, the NBC Orchestra, a top-tier studio musician.
But with Enoch Light, he found this really unique role.
He did.
So why was a guitar player so central to this stereo experiment? Why not a piano or a sax?
It goes back to the physics of sound. A piano is a big resonant instrument. It fills the room, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from.
It spreads out.
It spreads out.
Yeah.
A saxophone has breath. It bleeds into the room. But a guitar,
It's a point source.
it's a plucked instrument. Pluck, sustain, silence. It has a very definable location in space. That made it the perfect tool for light stereo games. You could pan a guitar riff, hard left, then hard right, and the listener could track it perfectly.
But Mottola wasn't just playing scales for a sound test.
No, and that's the key. He brought soul to the machine. He had this very warm, lyrical style. He released the Roman Guitar series on Command Volumes 1, 2, and 3.
So we're talking like O Sol Mio in high fidelity.
Basically. But it worked. It bridged the gap. It gave people familiar emotional melodies, but presented with this dazzling, futuristic clarity. It made the technology accessible.
There's one album mentioned in the notes that sounds particularly wild. Enoch Light presents Tony Mottola and the quad guitars.
A fascinating artifact. This was before multi-tracking became standard in rock. Mottola and Light were pushing it to the extreme in the easy listening genre.
So quad guitars means 4 guitars, but it was just him, right?
Often, yes. He'd record a rhythm track, then layer a harmony, then a bass line, then a solo. They were building a virtual guitar quartet.
Which again feeds into that command philosophy and construct a reality that couldn't exist live.
Exactly. You couldn't have 4 Tony Mottolas on stage. But on the record, you could.
It's so interesting that this innovation was happening in what many people just dismissed as elevator music.
Easy listening gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
But technologically, these guys were on the absolute cutting edge. They were doing things in 1960 that, the Beatles wouldn't get around to for another 5 or 6 years.
So we have this decade of dominance in the 60s, but then culture shifts. Psychedelia happens. What happens to command records?
The novelty wore off. It's the inevitable cycle of technology. Stereo stopped being a special feature and just became how music was.
The surprise was gone.
The surprise became the standard. By the 1970s, you didn't need a demonstration disc. Command records wound down. The space age ended.
But the story doesn't end there. The MMR column talks about a big revival in the 90s and 2000s.
The bachelor pad revival, it started as a purely aesthetic thing. People started finding these records in thrift stores for, 50 cents.
And they saw the Joseph Albers covers.
They saw the Albers squares, the heavy gatefolds, the cool typography. It just looked incredibly cool. It fit perfectly with the revival of mid-century modern furniture.
So it was furniture decoration at first.
It was. But then the hip-hop community found them.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it. If you're a producer, what are you looking for? A clean drum beat, an isolated guitar riff, a break.
And Enoch Light had spent a decade making sure every instrument was perfectly isolated. Because he recorded on 35mm film with no background noise and separated everything so aggressively, he inadvertently created the perfect sample library.
So he engineered these records for a suburban dad in 1959, but actually made the perfect tool for a producer in 1999.
The beautiful irony. The soulless technical precision became the foundation for a whole new genre of soulful music. Artists like the Beastie Boys and so many others raided these crates because the sound quality was just unbeatable.
The research also draws a parallel to our modern audio habits. The desire for sound design is back.
It is. Think about spatial audio or Dolby Atmos in your headphones. We are obsessed with digital processing that simulates a room. We want to hear the sound all around us.
We're using software to fake the room, just like Light used panning and reverb to fake the soundstage.
The technology has changed. It's digital, not 35mm film, but the goal is identical. It's that desire for an immersive, controlled acoustic environment.
He proved that the medium, the way the sound reaches your ears, is just as important as the song itself.
And that's a legacy that touches everything from Pink Floyd to modern virtual reality audio.
It really brings up a question about how we consume music now. We have access to everything instantly, but are we listening with the same intent?
That's the fascinating and maybe slightly provocative thought to end on. Light's whole thing was about the shock of the first listen. He demanded your attention. You had to sit in the sweet spot between the speakers.
Today, we listen on Bluetooth speakers, in the car, on earbuds while we're doing something else. The audio is usually compressed.
We've traded fidelity for convenience. And in doing so, maybe we've lost that physical sensation of sound that Light worked so hard to engineer. We treat music like background wallpaper.
When was the last time a piece of recorded music actually startled you with its realism?
It's rare. We're used to a wall of sound, but not necessarily a stage of sound. We hear the music, but we don't necessarily see it the way Light intended.
So maybe the takeaway for you listening in today is to try a little experiment. Find a high-quality file, put on a good pair of headphones, or better yet, sit in front of actual speakers, put your phone down, and just listen to the placement of the sound.
And if you can find a digital copy of Persuasive Percussion, give it a spin. It might still surprise you 60-plus years later. You might just find yourself looking over your shoulder to see where that bongo player is standing.
It's been a fascinating look at how a technical gimmick became an art form.
Always a pleasure to dig into the archives.
Thanks to everyone for listening to this deep dive into the architecture of sound. We'll see you next time.